Good evening, everybody. It is Friday, May 15th, and we are Facebook Live. So tonight I've got 3 projects to share with you, and all of them feature the Accented Bloom stamp set, which is this one right here. And this one is on the retiring list, so it is only available until June 2nd. However, all of the techniques I'm showing you here, you can use with any of your stamp sets that require watercoloring. So we're not doing true watercolor, but a little bit kind of a twist on those. And then along with this, the tailored tag punch actually coordinates with this. So those are a great purchase to do together. So let's get started. If you missed the first part of the video, I will be posting a replay and you can always go back and watch that later. So the first card I've already shared on my blog today, and let me show that one to you. And that is this one here. And as you can see, the colors on this are really bright and just really pop off the card. So let me show you how I did this one. So you're going to want to start with the Fluid 100 watercolor paper. And this is super smooth watercolor paper. So, and it also helps really to absorb that water. You're not going to want to do this on Whisper White if you want those colors, because your paper will tend to warp and you just really won't get the same result. So I've got that piece and I am going to stamp. Let me pull my Stamparatus over here. The reason I use the Stamparatus for this is because if for some reason I screw this up, I can always go back and fix it. So we're going to emboss this first. I'm not a great watercolor person. There are some people that do beautiful watercolor work. I am not one of them. So I like to cheat a little bit. So I'm using a Versamark pad. And a Versamark pad is great for giving you tone on colored cardstock, but the other thing it's really great for is embossing. So you can emboss just about any color embossing powder with this pad. So I'm going to ink that up really good, and I'm going to stamp that onto my watercolor paper. Okay. All right. And then once I've got that stamped, I am going to use the black embossing powder, and I'm going to sprinkle that over the image. So if you haven't embossed before, this is just the basic way to do this. It's pretty easy. Now, if I had missed a spot or anything after I've heat set this, I could go back and I could redo that, put that back in the Stamparatus, stamp it again, and do the embossing powder a second time. But that looks like that did pretty good. So the next step would be to use the heat tool. Now, I'm not going to use the heat tool right now, but because really it's loud if I do that during a video, and nobody really wants to hear that. But you're going to use the heat tool on this until that powder melts and becomes somewhat shiny. So I'm going to set that aside. And again, you can do this with any embossing powder. So I did heat emboss one of those, and I also cut one out. So I did this with my scan and cut, but you could pretty easily do this with scissors as well. So, you know, if you don't have a die cutting machine that can cut that out, it's still a pretty easy one that you could cut around the edges on. Okay, so I'm going to set this aside. Put that there. And we're going to set that on here. You probably hear little tap, tap, taps. Those are my little doggies. They like to be here when I'm doing my stamping, so we have that little noise. So what I've got here is just a piece of really stiff cardboard. And a lot of times I will use cardboard off of my designer series paper or something like that. But I'm going to just tape that down. This minimizes how much warping we're going to get on that piece. So if we look back at the original card, you can see on the background area, I did just a gentle wash on that. So the way that I do that, I'm going to take one of my acrylic stamping blocks, and I have a re-inker here. So I'm using Coastal Cabana, and I'm going to put just a drop on that block. Now, anytime if you shop with me that you buy an ink pad, I always recommend you buy the re-inker to go with it. It's not that you will need to re-ink your pads that often, but there's a lot of techniques you can do as well with those re-inkers, and this is just one of those. So I'm using an aqua painter. Now the aqua painters were on the retired list, and they have already sold out as far as I can tell. But Stampin' Up! Is coming out with a new one. So if you didn't get this style, there will be some new ones in the new catalog. So I'm going to wash that down so that it's pretty light. I'm just adding water to that. And these just unscrew and you fill them with water, just tap water. Some people like to do distilled. Honestly, it really isn't going to matter that much. But I'm just going to take that water down and I'm going to start running that on the watercolor paper. That's going to create our background. And you can see this particular watercolor paper is really, really smooth. And so that color is just gliding on there. It's absolutely beautiful. But that's the way that you create a pretty simple watercolor wash. You can always go back over it and get that darker, but really simple to create a nice smooth wash. And I'm just using that for my background piece. So I'm going to keep it on there so that it doesn't warp very much, and I'll set that aside. So since I've already got the blue, I'm going to go ahead and start coloring my flowers here. So I did these flowers right here in the blue. And I'm just going to pick up that color off of my block and color with that. Okay. I always keep a paper towel nearby so that I can wipe off my aqua painter and then go to my next color. Now normally I'm going to start with my lightest color first and then work my way to darker colors. So the next color I'm going to use is Mango Melody. And in the supply list, I didn't put the colors because you can really use whatever colors you've got on hand. So don't worry if you don't have these exact colors. You can still do this with whatever colors you do have. So then we're going to just add our color there onto this. And I want to put a little bit in the centers of a couple of these. So I'm just going to go ahead and add that. And what I like about using the embossing on this is they don't bleed as much. Now they are still going to bleed a little bit, and you can even kind of clean that up if that happens and you don't really like the look. But it doesn't bleed as much as if you were just doing on a flat surface. That embossing gives it just a little bit of a raised area so that it holds that in place. So next I'm going to use some Granny Apple Green, and again I'm just using a single drop of this. So you can see you can do tons of watercoloring effects with these, and you have lots to do with it. So we're going to just touch some of that in there. This is a little wet, so I'm just going to dry that off there, and we're going to continue that. And right there. We'll go to our next color. As you can see, I've got some water here. I'm just going to add my pink to that. This is Melon Mambo that we're using there. And let's get that diluted down. And you can add more water and make that a really light pink if you want, but I wanted it to be really bold and really bright. And this block works great just as a little palette. You could also use a small dish or something if you wanted to, but you know, just because I already have a block, those make it really good. Okay, so I did want to let you know, if you didn't get my email newsletter today, I did mention that shipping's taking a little bit longer. Most orders are taking right between 2 and 3 weeks to get to me right now. So if there are things you're wanting for summer break, make sure you get those orders in quickly. Okay, looks like I forgot a little green spot there. The final color I used was Gorgeous Grape. I'm going to just put a little bit there. We don't even need very much for that. And again, we're going to put a little water with it. Let me squeeze that. There we go. And we're just going to add that to the purple flowers. Then this just needs a little bit of time to dry like the other piece did. Okay. And let me go back and get my little leaf here. Let's see if I can do it without bleeding it too much. Okay. So when I did it before, I really didn't go and do it while it was, I let everything dry in between so it didn't bleed too much. So you can see the difference there. So you're going to get more bleeding if you do it while it's still wet. But there we go. The one other thing I want to show you with this stamp set is how to get that hello to stamp really bold. So if I just stamp the hello one time, I'm going to bring my Stamparatus over here once again. And we're going to put our paper right here. I'm going to lock that down. Okay, and I'm using Memento black ink for this. And I'm going to ink that up. So I've got that inked up really nicely. If I push that over, let me just show you what it ends up looking like. So it ends up giving you kind of a blotchy effect. Now I wanted mine to be a really beautiful solid black, so I'm actually going to stamp it a second time, and the Stamparatus allows me to have that perfectly lined up. So I'm going to ink that up a second time. I'm going to press that down. Oops, I think I moved it that time. So let's do that one more time. Let me do it without moving it this time, because normally you wouldn't pick it up and show to people. So let's ink it once. We're going to get that blotchy stamp, and we're going to do it the second time, just like so. And you'll see it comes out much smoother. And then I'm going to use that tailored tag punch that coordinates. And again, I like to use my punches upside down. And I'm going to line that up inside there and punch that out. Okay, so we have our little hello for that as well. All right, so one more time, I'll show you that finished card. This one is on my blog today, so if you want a close-up of that, you can go see that. As you can tell, I just popped that up with some dimensionals and added a few sequins, and there's your card. So the next one that I'm going to show you is, let's see, which one do we want to do? All right. So on this piece, I embossed. So I used the Versamark pad just like we did on the first, and I used white embossing powder and then heat set that, and this is on crumb cake cardstock. So I really love the effect that happens with this. And with these, I am going to use the watercolor pencils. So this may be one of those things that you bought at one point and just haven't used, but they are really a lot of fun. So you do get, I believe, 12 colors in this, and we're going to go ahead. And what's nice about these, so even kids could use these, they really are not messy at all, but we're just going to lay down some color. And as you can see, I'm not being real perfect with this at all. I'm just kind of putting color in each one of these little areas where I want this yellow, and I believe this is Daffodil Delight. So I'm going to put that there. I'm going to go back, and this is Melon Mambo, just like what we used in the last card. And again, I am just scribbling color in here quickly. I would probably spend a little more time on this if I didn't have everybody watching me, but you know, we want to, it's going to work just fine. But I love the way that these colors end up popping on the crumb cake cardstock. Does anybody have these watercolor pencils and just haven't brought them out for a while? I know sometimes we get supplies and we know we wanted them, but we don't really know why we bought them. So sometimes it's nice to get out some oldies but goodies. So I'm looking for my green. Here's my green. I'm going to put some green down here. And we've got a couple leaves over here. I'm going to do a couple of little blue flowers over here. And I'm going to do a few orange ones over here. Okay, so I know you're looking at that and going, well, that's not very pretty, Melissa. Hope you're going to do something a little better, but you can see I've just scribbled on there. So that's not bad, but what I like to do next is take a blender pen and blend those colors out. So blender pens are one of those, it's one of the few products that's been around almost as long as I have. And I love these things. They're kind of an unsung hero with Stampin' Up. I don't think people realize just how great they are. But you want to start with one color at a time. So I'm starting with my yellow, and I'm just going to run that blender pen on over it. Once you're done with that color, just run it on your paper until it goes clear, and then you're ready for your next color. So I'm going to go ahead and do the orange that's down here, and I'm just blending that color out and getting that a little bit darker on there. Okay, then I'm going to go into my Melon Mambo here. We're going to get that colored. And if you want more color, you can go back over it and add a second layer. I like it kind of light and subtle. But like I said, this is just another way to watercolor. You could use those aqua painters or even a watercolor brush with the watercolor pencils. I like the blender pen because it's not going to saturate this cardstock. Because the craft is a little bit lighter than the watercolor paper, it just works really well. We're going to do these. We're going to blend those out. Just like so. Same thing for the green. Get those all blended out. And it just makes that color really nice and smooth. So blender pens are one of those things that are just a great purchase. You get 3 of them for one low price, and you can use them for ages on that. So you can see now, see how that color is really blended in now and just really looks nice. So let me show you the finished card for that one. And here is that. So I did heat emboss the thank you on that and added a few of the pearls to that card. And then a final one that we're going to do. This one is actually my favorite. I've got to get a little organized here because we have a lot to do. We're going to use our Stamparatus again. So let me bring it into the picture. And I'm going to turn it this way so you can see a little better. So I have a piece of the Fluid 100 paper. I want to make sure this is going to fit, so I'm going to put that right on there like so. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and hook that down. And I'm using the Sahara Sand ink pad. So I know you hear the pitter patter again. Those are the puppy dogs. They're just a little nuts. So what I'm going to do is ink that stamp up. And I want to stamp off. So I'm going to put just a scrap piece of paper in there, and I'm going to put that down. And what we are wanting to do is get a really light shade on there so that we just barely see all of the color. Okay, so as you can see, that is super duper light. See that on there? Okay, but you know it's there. All right, we're going to set that aside because we will need it again. And then the next thing I'm going to do is get my ink pads. And let me just show you the colors that I'm using. So I've got 5 colors that I'm using on this. We're using Melon Mambo, Calypso Coral, Coastal Cabana, Granny Apple Green, and Mango Melody. Okay, and I have 5 of the sponge daubers. So again, this is kind of a watercolor technique that isn't really using true watercolors. And what I'm going to do is use my daubers. I'm going to dip those into the ink, and I'm going to color with those. So I'm just going to add a little color up here. So I'm using a very similar color scheme to what I did on the others. Okay. But it's not very specific. So yeah, there go the dogs. Must be a squirrel. It's that time of night. But I know those of you that also have dogs understand. Okay, so now I'm using the Melon Mambo. And we're going to get that on there. And don't worry if you go into this area here. That's okay. Okay. And you can layer the colors on top of each other because this one we're really not going to worry too much if it bleeds together. I'm using the Calypso Coral on these right here. I've got some Coastal Cabana. So again, using a sponge dauber and just layering that color on makes it pretty easy. Okay. And then finally, we're going to do some Granny Apple Green, which is probably my favorite green right now. And we've got a couple of leaves over here. I'm going to just get that in there too. All right. So you're probably looking at this and going, wow, that's kind of a hot mess. All right. But our next step on that is we're going to spritz it with a spritzer. So this is another thing that's really inexpensive. You just fill these up with water, or there's other things you can do with them. But I'm just going to start spraying this. And because this is watercolor paper, that color is going to kind of run and bleed. And we're just going to kind of blot that a little bit. And we'll go back over it again and just let those colors run. So you can see it's just looking kind of blurry. So I had to do one earlier so I could show you how to finish this. So this is one that I've already done and that is dry. So there we go. Looks like that. So we are going to put that in here. And honestly, I don't know if this is going to line up because I think we moved it. Okay. So let me see. If it doesn't line up, it's going to be okay. I shouldn't have moved it. All right. So then what we want to do is grab our black ink pad and we're going to stamp over that. So we've got that watercolor look, but it's going to look like we actually watercolored it. I'm going to put that down. Oh, it turned out perfect. Look at that. Okay. So there we go. So even though we didn't do that, and this is a great way if you're worried about your black bleeding into your colors or getting that kind of muddied, this is a great way to do that. All right, so let me show you that finished card. Here we go. And with this one, I used the Ornate Floral Embossing Folder with that. And I did that technique that I showed you last week where I just rubbed the Whisper White craft ink over it and layered that with some Melon Mambo cardstock. Now, anytime I use a black card like this, I always like to put a piece of white in the middle, just so that you do have something to write your greeting on. So let me show you all 3 cards again. And the supplies are up in the comments or in the description, depending on if you're watching this on live or as a replay. So there are those. And just one last little housekeeping thing I wanted to tell you about. You are still able to get the Rainbow Punch card kit by mail with a $50 purchase this month. That needs to be before tax and shipping. and then I will ship this kit to you. Now, the other bonus that I just announced today is if you do make that $50 purchase, I have gotten my initial shipment of catalogs. I have about a dozen that I can ship out immediately, and then I'm waiting on another shipment to come later this month. But those first dozen will go to anyone that places a $50 or more order this month. So you will get the catalog early and also the card kit with any $50 order. So thank you so much for watching, and I will be back soon with another video for you. Have a good weekend.